Welcome to another Artist Talk by the SOCA Global Outreach Office. My name is Gillian Rhodes, and I am the Global Outreach Coordinator. Today we are talking about the art of improvisation and live performance, and my guest is an American composer and performer who has lived in Turkey and India to inform her soaring solos, authentic sound, and global grooves. She has a bachelor's degree in clarinet and flamenco performance from the University of New Mexico, and she founded the Tarab Retreat and directs the Tarjama Ensemble, a multidiscipline arts organization for refugee and immigrant artists and their allies. She creates scores for Warner Brothers films, Five Rhythms Dance, and the David Taylor Zikr dance companies. Her name is Meg York, and I'm very happy to have her with me today. So thank you so much for joining, Meg.
Hey, thanks for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk about this craft. I just really enjoy playing for dance. It's one of my favorite things to do, either recorded or live.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about that. But before that, I found on your website that you do create music for film and you're an ASCAP recording artist. And I just think that that's something that people could be really interested in. So could you just say quickly a little bit about how that works?
So it's really easy to do, actually, if you are a composer already and you have your tracks loaded up on a website or you have them available. You want to have them in wave format, which is the highest density. I think it's 96 kilobits per second. And I use a film score library. I use 411 library out of Los Angeles. And so you want to submit your tracks to them. Often they have an online portal, you create an account. It could be other film score libraries, but what you want to do is find a film score library and submit some of your work to them. Sometimes they create an artist page for you, or at least a little profile, and it'll have all that. But there's more to it. When you make a recording, let's say you're making a recording with a band, which I've done a lot of, you have microphones on each individual musician, and you create what are called stems. Stems are the clarinet and the bass and the drums, and perhaps you're lucky enough to be in a studio where they have separate rooms with glass doors so you can see each other. So you have individual recordings of each of those instruments, the trio, for example. What you're going to do is send in not only the whole thing, which has been mixed and mastered so it sounds lovely, has a little bit of reverberation, or they warmed up the sound on the drums, or however, and you also want to send the individual tracks, the stems. Sometimes the film score clients will look for only a little snippet of something, and they don't want the whole song. Or they want just the drum track, or they want just the clarinet track, or they want just the backup vocals. So it's really interesting. You can't really, per se, in my experience, make something for a film. In that case, for Warner Brothers, they just go to the film score library and look for a certain timbre that they're going to mix into their sound score. Now, in other cases, filmmakers have approached me and said, hey, we're doing this documentary about Wadi Rum in Jordan, and we want some Middle Eastern sounding ambient music. Can you make something specifically for that? And then I have their film, and it's kind of like traditional silent film accompaniment. You have their film rolling without any sound, and you're making something to go with it. So it has to be a certain length. Perhaps there's some hits on there. You know, in this case, she was climbing on the rock and she slid a little, so I made like some exciting, and then the rhythm kept going after that. Just depends on the client. I've also made a lot of scores for ballet, and that's totally different because they want it extremely specific metronomic marking the whole time. They want maybe a little bit of no rhythm, arrhythmical stuff at the beginning, very short, and then they want it just cut and dried, tick-tock for a certain amount of minutes, however that's going to be. When I've made scores for Five Rhythms out of New York, they have, like it says, 5 rhythms. So they start with no rhythm and go to no rhythm. And then they have lyrical, frenetic, and emotional. I think emotional is the wrong term, but they have 5 different moods. And so you can tailor your offering to that. You can start with no rhythm, arrhythmical, and then you can do something that's kind of a medium rhythm, and then something that's fast, something that's a medium rhythm, and something that's slow going to no rhythm again. So it has a bell curve concept. And each of those can be individual tracks. So again, you have stems, which are individual instruments that are playing on a track that's the whole song, or you have just a solo piece. I have so much more to add about this, but this is probably enough for you. I don't know. Do you want to know more?
Yeah, no, I think that's enough for now, because I want to get into the main topic of our conversation, which is really about playing live and live improvisations, which is, as you
Yeah,
said, something that you really
one of
love
my
to
favorite
do.
things. Yes.
Yeah, so tell me, like, how did you get into that in the first place? What made you want to play for live performers?
Well, there's something about playing. First of all, I have an extensive theater background. I've played for, I'm going to guess, 25 shows that are similar to you would see on Broadway, but of course for much, much smaller regional theaters or even city level theaters or school, high school productions, college productions, that kind of thing. I played for opera in that setting as well. So you're in the pit and you're playing for movement on the stage. So even though it's all transcribed, it's all written down specifically, play this. Maybe you get a microsecond of stretching the time just a tiny bit. That was always very exhilarating. I've also played a ton for old time American style dance called contra dance. So if you think of Virginia Reel or any of these long dances that have two lines of dancers going back and forth, exchanging places, doing arm gestures where they trade places. There's specific pulse per minute, beat per minute for that, but you're improvising how long it's going to be. It has to be, let me rephrase that. It's 36 bars. The form of it is 36 bars. So it has to be 36 bars long, but in between that, you can kind of do whatever you want. So that was very intoxicating. I also started playing for flamenco dance in college at the University of New Mexico with Eva and Cynthia Sandoval and Pablo Rodarte and Joaquin and Cynthia Sandoval, these incredible flamenco artists back in the 80s and 90s. And at that point, she was adamant that it was all live music for her classes. She never pushed on a tape recorder or a CD player, or I should say an MP3 player or an iPhone attachment, whatever. But back in the day, we were literally recording everything on cassette tape for class. We would record it,
Right.
we would fix it and offer it to her later. So playing for that kind of situation, you can see the form. You have to have the form in your head. You don't just play whatever. You have to have the form, you have to have the compass, you have to have the rhythmic cycle of what the movement wants. And I'm specifically talking about improvising for movement.
Right.
You can, of course, just improvise for your own edification or for meditation. That's a little different. But when you're improvising for movement, dancers need an implied beat.
Yeah.
It's okay to have a little bit of arrhythmical stuff at the beginning, or you can have a beat going on with arrhythmical stuff on top of it, but the beat really needs to be there for a comfort level for the movement artist, because they want to know where they're going to place their limbs, where they're going to place their footfalls. And I find that you can stretch that, but you really want to communicate very clearly where that's going to be. So having a deeply embodied sense of rhythm myself helps that, because I'm also a swing dancer. Back in the day, I was a core ballet dancer, flamenco dancer, and I've done a ton of contra dancing and square dancing and all of that. So it's in my body. So I know how to give that to the dancers so they're really comfortable. So fast forward to 1991, I started playing for belly dancers. Totally. All this other thing I've talked about, it's like you have a very strict compass, and then you play just the rhythm, you play on top of the rhythm, but the rhythm is the potatoes of what you're offering. Belly dance is different because they really dance to the melodic contour of what you're playing. So the rhythm is going on for sure, but they're doing arm gestures and also changing their overall lines. They're doing undulations. They're doing spins that emulate the melodic contour of what you're playing. Once I experienced that, I was hooked. And I wanted to play for belly dancers a lot, and I have. So I started playing for belly dancers with this group called the Society for Creative Anachronisms. And they're a reenactment society that focuses on medieval and pre-Western culture Renaissance time period. And you go to these events and everybody's dressed up in costume and camping, and there's fires and people are dancing around the fire, and there's all these drummers. And so I remember the moment, like 1989, I got out like a metal clarinet that I took because it was camping, and I started playing just some, I just started playing something like this. I didn't know anything yet about Middle Eastern music or anything. I was a kid. I was like 19 years old. So there's this rhythm going on. Boom, da 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 do do da. And I just synced up with the rhythm. Suddenly the dancers who were just kind of like, suddenly they went like this when they heard that melodic contour. And I was like, wow, that was really beautiful. I wonder if they'll do it again. So I went, and suddenly more of them are responding. And I want you to get a visual of this. There's like 8 or 10 people around a campfire. There's 8 or 10 drummers sitting on stools around the campfire. Everybody is just really having a party moment. But it's outside, we're camping, the stars are out. It's really kind of a magic moment. I was hooked. I just wanted to know, how do I give dancers what they want?
You started to talk about the work and kind of the practice that goes into improvisation. So like you were saying, it's not that you just play whatever. There's so many techniques that you're drawing upon, and there's a lot of practice that goes into actually doing the improvisation. So let's talk more about that.
Sure. That's a great question. I often there's been lots of artists that have even made statements about my art is trying to make my art seem effortless, right? There's a couple schools of thought. One is that you just do whatever.
Yeah.
And, throw it up against the wall and see what sticks, right? Well, that's okay if you're playing like avant-garde stuff. But if you want something that's going to speak to people on a primal level where it's really going to encourage them to move, it has to be attached to some sort of tradition.
Right.
I believe. Now, I didn't grow up with a Middle Eastern tradition, nor a Hindustani tradition, or a flamenco tradition. I came to that in college.
Right.
I was lucky enough to hear some live klezmer music, which is Jewish folk jazz. And what klezmer dance is usually in circles. It's called the hora. Everyone's, doing this kind of thing. Oh, this Mediterranean, pan-Mediterranean style of dancing. So I was in school. I was a band nerd. I got a classical degree in clarinet. I also had to audition for various projects, all-state band, getting into orchestra, whatever. I just had to hone my craft. Plus, I took a few lessons, right? So, of course, you're doing, right? C major scale for us, B flat concert if you have perfect pitch. Well, that's cool, but how about this? So it's kind of a minor scale, but has a major third. So what if I do all of my patterns that I've prescribed to do in my clarinet classical music study, Western classical music study, but I do it on Middle Eastern modes? It'll sound like this. So I'm basically just creating technical exercises, not necessarily by ear, but kind of by finger memory.
Yeah.
That is when you're doing an improvisation, you have it in your fingers already, so you can let your mind kind of slip a cog and go into that ecstatic moment where you're like, wow, I just really want to watch what's going on. I don't want to think about what my fingers are doing. Oh, they know what to do, right?
Right. Yeah.
I've honed those skills. The other big deal is ornamentation. Ornamentation is like the accent for a language. So you can play, for example, I'll play the same kind of riff in a couple different styles. Like if you're just playing Western classical, right? Really clean, really straight, kind of rhythmically square.
Yeah.
Here's Jewish. So that little ornament, that's really blatantly like, here it is in a microscope, but in context. It's called a kretsch, which means cry. So that's Jewish style. You could also play it Middle Eastern style, which would be, there's like you're stretching it a little more.
Yeah.
Anyway, ornamentation is huge. So you start playing these technical exercises where you're taking these Middle Eastern scales and playing all of your Western classical scale patterns on them as if you were a jazz player, because I also did play jazz. Because jazz players have to run all of their patterns in all 12 keys and all 32 bar forms and all of that. I find a little constrictive, and I'm frankly a little lazy, so I don't do all of that. What's nice is modal music, Middle Eastern, Persian, Hindustani classical, Arabic, tends to play in just a handful of keys because it's based on string instruments that accompany most of the time.
Right.
Small tangent, clarinet is not usually played in Arabic music. It's usually played in Persian or Jewish or Balkan, huge in Balkan music, Greek and Turkish. Clarinet is like the electric guitar. It's the lead instrument. It's the one that takes the melody all the time. It's the one that's expected to take the solos all the time. The rest of the band is basically accompanying the clarinet. It was fantastic. So once I discovered that, I knew that was the direction I wanted to also go into. So getting back to it, metronome, scales, but wait, what are these different rhythms? I don't know. I mean, I know, I'm just being facetious. So for example, we're used to 4/4 and 3/4 in Western classical music. We're also used to 6/8. What if you made a compound meter that was based on a combination of those? So, 4/4 is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Yeah. So what if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Wait, it's an odd number. It's actually 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So now I need to do all my patterns in odd numbered meters, which is a really great thing for your brain. Now, of course, there's all sorts of apps for this now. You can literally get metronome, tabla, metronome on your phone and play along with it, play along with recordings. 100% of the time, recordings are the best way to learn anything. So then I started going, okay, fine. I'm playing with drummers. I see where their hand positions are. I listen to recordings of master musicians in these idioms. How do they deconstruct it? How do they get to where they are? Well, what they do is they play patterns. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now, I just think it's cool to play in odd numbered meters. I had to really drill that, though. I had to have metronomes on. I had to play with a lot of people that were percussionists, and I had to listen to a lot of music. So
I think we've covered at this point kind of the technical aspects to it, and I think it's been really interesting to hear you talk about all of the technical work that goes into it. But I want to sort of go beyond the technique and talk about kind of the feeling of it. So in our previous conversations, you've talked about bravery and courage in the context of improvisation, and how that sort of comes into play with people who haven't done it before. So I want to take a moment to talk about that. What do you think where does the courage come from when you're talking about, playing live for performers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's part of our culture, and I'm talking about Western ballet culture, to play for either a very strict meter, or recordings. And I've had lots of ballet dancers tell me, "Oh, I played live music I dance to live music all the time." I'm like, "Really? Cool. Is it a pianist?" And they're like, "Yeah." So what that pianist is tasked to do for class is play a waltz, improvise a waltz for 15 minutes while we stretch. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So there's not really improvisation there, but they have a live musician in the room. So they're used to the idea of a live musician. They're not really used to this melodic contour improvisation. And so what I love to do for ballet dancers especially is really show them that there is fun to be had listening on top of the rhythm, really adjusting your movement so that it's not just really prescribed positions, which I don't even know, I'm faking it right now, but that you can actually kind of do a really undulating stretch that will follow a melodic contour. So for example, there's this, I'm going to use that same lick I had earlier. So that note I started on, ended on, is the lowest note of this melodic fragment. So what I do when I work with dancers that have never improvised to melodic contour is I say, hey, here's your home bass. And I have them sing it and hum it, and they can be in a circle, and they can be, okay. And for them, it feels like they're skydiving, like there is abject terror in some of these people's eyes. It's really incredible that they've been so boxed in by our culture that they cannot improvise. They can only do prescribed movement that they've rehearsed a million times. And that's part of our, I think, detriment, is that we haven't encouraged improv. So, I start them with baby steps, like, okay, here it is. When my notes go up, your arms go up. And they go, and when my notes go down, your arms go down. And then they go, oh, it's that easy. I'm like, yeah, it's that easy. And so then we do more. We go, I'm going to go up halfway and hold it, and so are you. And then they go, oh, okay, and then they do it. It's really wonderful. You can practice at home. And then I'm using some interesting techniques that you don't normally hear on Western classical clarinet, vibrato, right? Like on violin, you're used to it, but on clarinet, not so much. So and then they're like, oh, and then they start going like this a little bit, and it just really syncs up what's going on. I always improvise with my eyes open. You'll find a lot of melody players, oh, I'm playing for dance. And they have their eyes squinched because they're emoting within themselves. I'm like, I've literally tapped on their shoulders when I've had workshops, like, by the way, there's a dancer right in front of you that's trying to give you some interaction. Can you open your eyes? So you have to watch, and you have to make sure that you're not compelling the movement, that there's a conversation that's happening at lightning speed, fast as neurons, between the music and the movement, where you play something, they move, you react to their movement, they react to your melody, but it has a prescribed contour. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. Abject terror, and then baby steps. That's usually it. Also, if people are listening to the same idiom, like my stuff sounds Middle Eastern because I've listened to so much Middle Eastern music. It sounds Balkan because I've listened to so much Balkan music and practiced those steps I was talking about, that they kind of can hang their hat on there. They're like, okay, I kind of know where this is going. So, but yeah, it's such a cathartic experience when dancers break free of that past expectation that everything has to be perfectly choreographed and there is no room for making it your own. They have this epiphany, like, oh, it's very freeing. So I love doing that. Anyway.
So I just want to rephrase the last question, and then we can introduce the demo section that you've prepared for us. But I think that moment when things sync up and there's this conversation that's happening between the performer and the musician, like, and that's really what all of this work is going towards, right?
That's exactly correct. In my mind, I don't want to treat the dancer as if they're just moving and I'm making them move, like, they're a puppet on strings. I want it to really, truly be an interaction. That's very difficult when you're working with somebody new. So I just put on, especially if they're young, if they, actually it depends. Like young dancers that are really inexperienced have less baggage, right? Old dancers can have more technique and more embodiment, but they might also have more baggage that they have to break through. So it really just depends on their personality. But when you get to that moment that that the music and the movement and the audience, if there's audience, there's all of this, there's this vortex of information and experience going on. That moment is called Tarab, and that's why I named my retreat Tarab Retreat. It's an Arabic and a Persian word. It's in both languages. And it's like you're hanging out and it's late at night under the stars, there's a campfire, or maybe you're in somebody's living room and everybody's just hanging out. Maybe it's at a cafe, or maybe it's at a club where everybody's drinking tea, or maybe beer or whatever. But it's that moment where you're like, yeah, we're all in this together. So my job, I feel like, is I'm kind of the cosmic hostess on that. Like, here will be your beautiful moment this evening. For years, I play the clarinet, which is a Western instrument. Here we go. And then you just play something and it knocks everybody's socks off because I've done the study. It's not like I just go out and play whatever I want. I've done the study. So I like to say, if you hear really great notes coming out of my playing, those are my teacher's notes. If you hear questionable notes that maybe aren't in the scale and sound like they're out of place, those are mine. Sorry. But no, the goal is that everybody is in it together and everybody feels like they're contributing more or less equally. There's also, you have to relinquish your ego and just be like, I'm the accompanist. They are also accompanying me. We're all accompanying this experience that's happening. So
yeah,
I just love it. I wish more people took the plunge. I've also played for avant-garde improvisation. There's this movement called contact improv dance. I played a lot of those guys too. Totally different vibe. They don't listen. They're just like doing their own thing, grooving out, have their eyes completely shut. They're like, oh yeah, man, that's great. Yeah. And they're like rolling around on the floor and everything. And you're like, there's nothing given back. So I try not to play for those guys because it depletes me. It's like they're taking, but they're not giving back. Yeah. I find only so far in my life experience that the ethnic culture steeped traditions have that reciprocal experience, that it's expected to be reciprocal, that you're playing for them, and the dancers, and the dancers are giving you some juice back, like, yeah, and they have their eyes open. So it's very awkward to have your eyes open. We don't do it in our culture very much, right? Like right now, I'm continually looking at the monitor instead of the camera. But that's the most scary step. The second most scary step for dancers when they're beginning to improvise is I say, okay, you got to watch. Watch. Who am I watching? Me. I'm right there with you. You have to watch. Like, okay. So anyway, it's a very human experience, and I just love it. It's very specific. I don't know very many people that are inside of the Anglo-American culture, and especially that are female, that play for belly dancers. I can name like 4 of them on my hand, and I think we all know each other. So
right. Yeah, no, I think, yeah, I mean, I think it is, and I've experienced this because I've done it. It's just it's a beautiful moment, and it's really kind of, what art does, it brings people together. So kind of in that spirit is the sort of demonstration that you have prepared. And so can you just introduce it a little bit before we get started? Who's performing with you and what are you guys doing?
Sure. So we did an improvisation section using a pan-Turkish Arabic rhythm called Shiftatelli. And the artists you're going to see are Arthur Lefebvre on percussion and Eric Koenig on dance. And we literally just jammed it out. So, of course, we've played together a lot in the past, and I have some certain phrases that I like to play that Eric will emulate. He was complaining a lot about the small space we had him in. He likes to travel around. But the concept that you're going to see is that I'm playing something, and then he comes in and he spins around, and you can see it's almost like we're breathing together, not only physically breathing together with the phrasing of the wind instrument, but also the melodic contour goes up, he expands his frame and contracts his frame when the melodic contour goes down. So that's what you're going to see. And the band is called Tarjama Ensemble. Tarjama means translation. And interestingly enough, it's in Arabic and Farsi. So those are two cultures that are really.
And Urdu as well, actually.
Mhm. Yeah, so it means translation, which I think is great because I am who I am, and so there's always going to be an element of translation in this process. I didn't grow up in the Middle East. Shiftatelli is like the jam rhythm, and it goes like this. It goes, you'll hear it. It's over and over and over, and Arthur fills it in lovely, and that's really fun. So the dancer, Eric, has the choice of being with the beat or being with the melody. And you'll see him ebb and flow between those two concepts. It's really a beautiful thing. So
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and thank you to your team. But yeah, thank you for being here and for sharing your knowledge. It's really interesting and just a wealth of knowledge. I'm sure we could talk for much longer, but we're out of time.
yeah. No, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. It always clarifies my process to verbalize. And I just love offering this information because hopefully it'll entice people who have skills but haven't made that leap of artistic concept to improvise with each other. And yeah, just keep your eyes open, not only your ears, but your eyes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Meg.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yep.